The plumber called at 9. 14 inches the morning. I was in the backyard trying to remember how my wife used to arrange the garden. Moving a pot here, moving a pot there, getting it wrong every time. My phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. A local number I didn't recognize. His name was Frank Bellows. I'd hired him the day before to fix a slow leak under the kitchen sink, the kind of small household problem that piles up when you've been living alone for 14 months and can't bring yourself to care about much of anything. He was a quiet man, mid-40s, the sort of contractor who shows up on time and doesn't make small talk. I had liked that about him, sir. His voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to come inside. Right now. Is something broken? Did the pipe burst? No, sir. The pipe is fine. He paused, and I could hear him breathing slow and careful the way a man breathes when he's trying to hold himself together. There's something here you need to see, and I think you should be alone when you see it. I went cold. Frank, what are you talking about? Just come inside, please. Come to the study. My wife's study. I hadn't been in that room in over a year. I dropped the ceramic pot I was holding, didn't even hear it crack against the stepping stones, and walked back into the house. Frank was standing in the hallway outside the study door when I got there. He was a big man, broad through the chest, the kind of man you'd expect to be unshakable. He looked shaken. His hands were at his sides, and he kept opening and closing them like he didn't know what to do with them. The pipe under the kitchen sink went through the subfloor, and I had to trace the line, he said. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The access panel in the back of the closet there, the one with the shelves, it didn't sit right. I pushed on it. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to pry. He stepped aside. The closet door was open. My wife's winter coats still hung on the rod, her good wool coat on the far left, her navy pea coat in the middle, the green fleece she wore for errands on the right. The shelves on the back wall held stacked sweaters and shoe boxes, and the small wicker basket where she kept her spare reading glasses. The bottom shelf had swung outward on a hinge. Behind it was a space cut into the wall and the subfloor, maybe 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide, lined with a thin sheet of plywood. Inside was a metal document box, the kind with a combination lock, a small spiral notebook wrapped in a rubber band, and a sealed white envelope with my name written on it in my wife's handwriting. My hands started trembling before I even reached for it. Gerald, the envelope said. Her loops, her careful capital G. I'd watched her write that letter 300 times on cards and lists and grocery notes over 41 years of marriage. I turned to Frank. I need a few minutes alone. He nodded and walked back to the kitchen without a word. Good man. I sat down on the floor of the closet, surrounded by her coats, and I opened the envelope. My darling Gerald, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what I kept from you, and I'm sorry for what you're about to find out. I want you to know that every morning for the past 2 years I have looked at you across the breakfast table and nearly told you everything. I couldn't, not because I didn't trust you, because I was afraid for you, afraid for our son and our daughter. The man I was investigating is not a careful man when it comes to protecting himself. He has already made that clear to me. Let me explain from the beginning. In the spring of 2021, I started noticing patterns in our company's claims data that didn't make sense. I was a senior claims analyst at Cornerstone Workers' Compensation, and patterns were my job. Injured workers filing legitimate claims, claims that were fully documented by physicians and verified by investigators, claims that should have been approved without question were being systematically denied. Not all of them. Enough of them. The denials weren't random. They followed a code, an internal flag in our processing system that I had never seen documented anywhere. When I dug into who had the access to set that flag, there was only one name: Regional Director Martin Voss. I should have reported it to the State Insurance Commission immediately. I know that now. But Martin Voss had been in this industry for 30 years. He sat on 3 professional boards. He played golf with the state's insurance commissioner. I had watched junior employees get quietly pushed out for raising inconvenient questions, and I wasn't sure who I could trust. So I started keeping my own records. What I found over the next 18 months was worse than I had imagined. The flagged claims weren't just being denied, they were being redirected. Injured workers who couldn't work, couldn't pay their medical bills, couldn't support their families, were being steered toward a settlement processing firm called Meridian Resolution Services. On paper, Meridian helped claimants navigate the appeals process. In practice, Meridian pressured vulnerable people into accepting pennies-on-the-dollar settlements in exchange for waiving their right to appeal. The money Cornerstone saved went into a reserve account. Twice a year, Voss transferred portions of that account to a private investment LLC registered in Delaware. The LLC had one silent partner, Martin Voss. He was stealing from injured workers to enrich himself. And some of those workers, Gerald, some of them, lost everything. I found 3 cases where men who had been denied legitimate medical coverage for serious injuries died before they ever received a cent. 3 families destroyed so that one man could add to a portfolio he already didn't need. I built this hiding space in April of 2022. I know how that sounds. I know you would have said, Beverly, just call someone, but I needed to finish first. I needed it to be airtight. Voss had survived 2 internal audits that I suspect he orchestrated himself. I wasn't going to hand over something he could punch holes in. In September of 2022, he figured out what I was doing. I don't know exactly how. He called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon, closed the door, and told me that ambitious employees who overreached had a way of finding themselves without a career, without references, and sometimes without much else. He said he hoped I was being careful. He said that accidents happen to distracted people and that he would hate for my family to be affected by any kind of instability. He said your name, Gerald. He said our son's name. He said our daughter's name. I drove home that night shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. I thought about telling you. I sat at the kitchen table after dinner and I opened my mouth 3 times and nothing came out. You would have wanted to go to the police. You would have wanted to confront him. And I was terrified that would get one of you killed. So I finished the box. I finished the notebook. I wrote this letter. If you are reading this, something happened to me that was not an accident. Whatever the official report says, Martin Voss is responsible. Everything you need to prove it is in this box. The combination is the year we moved into this house, 1997. Forward, and then our anniversary month backward, 09. So 1997, then 09. Take it to the FBI, not the State Insurance Commission, not the local police. Voss has cultivated those relationships for decades. The FBI field office in Hartford. Ask for an agent named Patricia Dunn. I have never spoken to her directly, but a former colleague of mine who left Cornerstone 2 years ago reached out to her about irregularities there and told me she is honest and careful and she will listen. My love, my Gerald, 41 years and I would choose you again every single morning without hesitation. Tell our son that I am proud of the father he has become. Tell our daughter that she has more of my stubbornness than she realizes and that it is the best thing about her. And please, my darling, please don't stop living. The garden needs tending. Our grandchildren need their grandfather. You need more than grief. I love you. I have always loved you. You're Beverly. I don't know how long I sat there on that closet floor. Long enough that the light through the study window shifted. Long enough that Frank came quietly to the doorway twice and then withdrew without speaking. Let me tell you about my wife. We met in the fall of 1979 at a community college in central Connecticut, where we were both taking night classes. I was 27, teaching high school English during the day, working toward a master's degree at night. Beverly was 24, already 2 years into her career as a claims processor at an insurance company, taking accounting courses because she said numbers told the truth and she wanted to know how to read them. She was sitting 2 rows ahead of me in a financial analysis class I had no business being in, and she turned around once to ask if I had a spare pencil, and I fell completely in love with her in that moment. I am not exaggerating. It was instantaneous. Something in the way she asked, matter of fact and unhurried, like she had no idea she was the most interesting person in the room. We were married in 1983. Our son came in 1985, our daughter in 1988. Beverly was the kind of mother who remembered every small thing. The name of every teacher, every friend, every book her children were reading. She went back to school herself while the kids were in middle school, earned a degree in business analytics, and spent the next 20 years building a career on the simple principle that the numbers always told you something if you were willing to look carefully enough. She retired in 2019, unretired herself in 2020 when a former colleague called and asked if she would consult part-time for Cornerstone. She said yes because she was bored and because the work was interesting and because, she told me once, she couldn't stand the idea of wasting what she knew how to do. She died in November of 2023. She was 67 years old. She slipped on a wet floor in the parking structure attached to Cornerstone's main office building and fell down half a flight of concrete stairs. The medical examiner ruled it accidental. A wet floor, a woman in her late 60s, an unlucky fall. I had buried her, mourned her, tried to be present for our children and our grandchildren while I fell apart quietly on my own. I had never questioned the report. Not once. Martin Voss had attended her memorial service. He had stood in the reception line and shaken my hand and told me that Beverly was one of the finest professionals he had ever worked with, and that Cornerstone had lost something irreplaceable. I opened the document box. The combination worked exactly as she had described. Inside were 2 USB drives, a folder of printed documents, and a second smaller notebook filled in Beverly's careful handwriting with dates, names, case numbers, claim amounts, and notation so precise and organized that I could follow the entire scheme in the order she had uncovered it. I stayed up until 3 in the morning reading. The next day, I called the FBI field office in Hartford and asked for Agent Patricia Dunn. It took 4 days to reach her. When I finally did, when I told her my name and told her that my wife had been a claims analyst at Cornerstone Workers' Compensation and that she had left behind documentation of a systematic fraud scheme that may have cost 3 men their lives, the line went quiet for a moment. "Your wife," Agent Dunn said carefully. "Was her name Beverly Harmon?" I gripped the phone. "Yes." Another pause. "Mr. Harmon, a former Cornerstone employee, contacted me about potential irregularities there approximately 2 years ago. She mentioned that a colleague of hers was also looking into the situation. She never gave me a name, and I never heard back from either of them. My wife is dead. I'm very sorry. She left me evidence. 14 months of documentation. Names, dates, financial records, case files showing denied claims and the settlement firm that processed them." I heard the agent exhale slowly. "Mr. Harmon, I need you to bring me everything you have. Can you come to Hartford tomorrow morning? I'll be there at 8. And Mr. Harmon, don't discuss this with anyone before we meet. Not your family, not your attorney. If this is what it sounds like, the man you're describing has shown a willingness to remove obstacles. I already knew that. I had held the proof of it in my hands. The FBI moved quickly, more quickly than I had expected, and more quietly. Agent Dunn assembled a financial crimes team and 2 investigators with insurance fraud backgrounds. They spent 3 weeks analyzing Beverly's records, cross-referencing her documentation against Cornerstone's actual claims database, and tracing the financial flows she had mapped from the reserve account to Meridian Resolution to Voss's private LLC. Every figure Beverly had recorded checked out. Every transfer, every denial code, every date. They also located the 3 workers Beverly had identified in her notes. The families of 2 men who had died. A third man, a warehouse worker from Bridgeport named Calvin Tate, was still alive, 61 years old, living with his adult daughter because he couldn't afford to live alone after his back injury claim had been denied 5 years earlier. And the Meridian settlement he'd accepted out of desperation had covered less than a month of the medical bills he'd accumulated. Calvin had spent 5 years believing that he had simply been unlucky. He agreed to speak to investigators. He had been waiting, he told them, for someone to finally ask. The forensic accountants traced $4.7 million moved through Voss's LLC over 8 years. They found 2 offshore accounts. They found a vacation property in South Carolina purchased in the name of a family trust that had no family in it, and they petitioned a judge to re-examine the surveillance footage from the parking structure where Beverly died, footage that the original police investigation had reviewed but not preserved in its entirety. One camera had captured the stairwell entrance. The footage showed Beverly entering the stairwell at 6:47 p.m. It showed a second figure entering 40 seconds later. The figure wore a hat and kept his face angled away from the camera. The footage showed him exiting the stairwell 2 minutes after Beverly, alone. The original investigators had identified this figure as an unrelated building tenant and closed the inquiry. The FBI investigators, working with enhanced imaging, identified the figure as a man named Roy Casson, a private security consultant who had worked contract jobs for Cornerstone for 6 years and whose personal bank records showed a wire transfer of $12,000 from a shell company connected to Voss's LLC 4 days before. Beverly died. Martin Voss was arrested at his home in Farmington, Connecticut on a Tuesday morning in March. The charges were insurance fraud, wire fraud, 3 counts of criminal negligence causing death, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. He was in his bathrobe when the agents came to the door. His lawyer arrived within the hour, which told you something about how prepared he had been for a morning like this. He was led out past his neighbor, walking a dog, past a landscaping crew pruning a hedge, past everything ordinary that his ordinary Tuesday morning had promised him. I watched the arrest on the evening news, sitting in the armchair Beverly used to sit in when she read. I held her letter in my lap, the one she had written knowing she might not survive long enough for it to matter. "We got him," I said out loud to no one. "Beverly, we got him." The trial began 7 months later. I attended every session. I sat in the 3rd row of the gallery, close enough that Voss could see me if he chose to look. He almost never did. The prosecution called Calvin Tate as a witness. He walked to the stand slowly, with a cane he had needed for 3 years. He described filing his claim, receiving the denial, being contacted by Meridian, being told by a pleasant-voiced woman that his best option was to take their offer before the appeals window closed. He described signing the settlement agreement because he was 3 months behind on his rent, and his daughter was offering to let him move in, and he was ashamed and exhausted, and he didn't understand yet that he had been deliberately steered toward a dead end by a man who had then used his desperation to line a private account. He described, in a level voice that did not waver, what the 5 years after that had looked like. The courtroom was very quiet. The prosecution also played a recording. Beverly, it turned out, had done one more thing I hadn't known about. On the USB drives she had left in the document box was an audio file she had recorded 6 weeks before she died. She sat in front of her computer and she described the entire scheme in her own voice, methodically, clearly, the way she had always explained complicated things, with patience and a kind of quiet authority that asked nothing dramatic of you, only that you pay attention. Near the end of the recording, she said, "I know what I'm doing by keeping this to myself instead of going directly to authorities. I know it looks like I should have trusted the system sooner. Maybe I should have. But I had watched this man survive internal scrutiny twice. I was not willing to give him a 3rd chance to bury it. I wanted it to be undeniable. I believe it is undeniable now." A pause on the recording. Then, "If something happens to me before I finish, I hope whoever is listening to this will understand. I was not trying to be a hero. I was trying to do the only thing that made sense when you find out that someone is hurting people who have already been hurt enough. You document it. You preserve it. You make sure it survives, even if you don't." I was crying before she finished speaking. I could not help it. Half the jury was crying too. The defense tried. They argued that the surveillance footage was inconclusive, that the wire transfer to Roy Casson was for unrelated consulting work, that Beverly's documentation showed obsessive grievance against a supervisor rather than genuine evidence of wrongdoing. Nobody believed them. I watched the jurors' faces during the defense summation, and I watched what was not there, which was any doubt at all. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, over 2 days. Guilty on all counts. Voss received 22 years. Roy Casson, the man who had followed my wife into a stairwell, received 17. 2 Meridian executives were charged separately and pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for cooperation. The Connecticut State Insurance Commission launched a full investigation into Cornerstone's claims practices, an investigation that ultimately resulted in the company's license being suspended and its assets frozen, pending civil litigation by the families of the 3 workers who had died. Calvin Tate filed a new claim. This time, it was processed properly. After the verdict was read, I stood up slowly, the way a man my age stands up after sitting still for a long time, and I looked at Martin Voss. He was whispering to his attorney. He didn't look at. I don't know if he even knew who I was. I was just a widower in a gray suit. I walked out of the courthouse into a cold afternoon in October, and I stood on the steps for a long time looking at nothing in particular. The aftermath took most of a year to fully settle. Cornerstone's collapse affected a lot of people, most of them innocent employees who had simply worked there. I thought about that. Beverly would have thought about it too. She would have held both things at once, the necessity of what had happened and the cost of it, without letting either one cancel the other out. Her story was covered by the Hartford Courant and then by several national outlets. They described her as a whistleblower, an investigator, a woman who had spent 2 years methodically dismantling a fraud operation from the inside. The Connecticut Department of Insurance named its new anonymous reporting hotline after her, the Beverly Harmon Reporting Line. I was asked to speak at the announcement. I didn't say much. I said that she would have found the whole thing embarrassing and that she would have wanted the focus on the workers, not on her. I said she was the most precise and thorough person I had ever known, and that she had applied those qualities to protecting strangers who would never know her name. Then I sat down. Our son was the one who told our grandchildren. He has more of his mother in him than he realizes. The same methodical patience. The same preference for getting the details right. He sat with them in his living room, and he explained what their grandmother had done and why she had done it and what it had cost her. Our youngest grandchild, who was 8, asked if Grandma Beverly had been scared. Our son thought about it. He told them yes. He told them that being brave didn't mean you weren't scared. It meant you were scared and you kept going anyway because you believed that what you were doing mattered. Our daughter keeps a framed photograph of her mother on the desk in her home office, not a formal photograph. One I took without thinking at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, Beverly in her reading glasses with a coffee cup and a folder of papers, looking up at me with that expression she had, the one that said she was only half listening but that she was also, always, glad I was there. I go into her study now. I go in and I sit at her desk, and sometimes I open the notebooks she left behind and I read through her notes, the way you reread a letter from someone you love, not looking for new information, just wanting to hear their voice again in the words. The hiding space in the closet is still there. I couldn't bring myself to have it filled in. I cleared it out, obviously. Everything went to the FBI and then to the evidence archive, and eventually some of it will end up in the civil litigation files. But the space itself is still there behind the winter coats, a small empty room where my wife kept her secrets and her courage. Sometimes I put my hand on the back wall of the closet and I think about her in there, working by lamplight, organizing folders, speaking into a recorder in her calm, steady voice because she wanted the truth to outlast her if it came to that. She was so much braver than I knew. I knew her for 44 years, and she was still more than I had understood. Frank Bellows, the plumber, sent me a card after the verdict, handwritten. It said, "Mr. Harmon, I'm glad it came out right. She must have been quite a woman." I wrote back and told him she was. My daughter is the one who finally persuaded me to tend the garden again. She came over one Saturday in April with her 2 kids and a flat of marigolds, and she said, "Dad, Mom would be furious at the state of the back beds," and she was right. We spent the afternoon in the dirt together, the 4 of us. My granddaughter found a worm and named it immediately. My grandson complained about getting his sneakers dirty and then forgot to complain because the dirt was too interesting. Beverly had always said the garden was optimistic. You put something in the ground and you trusted the ground to do its part. I'm 64 now. I still teach 2 sections of English composition at the community college, where Beverly and I once sat in a financial analysis class neither of us was particularly suited for. My students are mostly 20 years old, and they write with great urgency about things they are only beginning to understand, which is the right age to write that way. I still carry her letter, the original, in a small envelope in my inside jacket pocket. It's gotten soft at the fold lines from being opened and refolded so many times. I don't read it anymore, not really. I know what it says. I carry it because she carried something for me for 2 years without my knowing, and this seems like the least I can do in return. I visit her grave every Sunday morning. I bring whatever is flowering in the garden. I tell her about the week, about our son's new project at work, about our daughter's youngest who is learning to read and has strong opinions about which books are worth the effort. I tell her that Calvin Tate sent a note last Christmas that said he was doing better. I tell her that the hotline named for her has received over 300 calls in its first year of operation. I tell her we're still here, still tending things. Last fall, I started having dinner occasionally with a woman named Helen who teaches history at the college and laughs at her own jokes before she finishes telling them, which I find completely endearing. We've had dinner 4 times. Beverly would have liked her, I think. Beverly would have asked approximately 40 precise and friendly questions at the first meeting and had Helen fully understood by dessert. I'm not there yet, but I'm somewhere, which is further than I was a year ago, which is further than I was the morning Frank Bellows called me in from the garden. Some mornings I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and my newspaper, and the light comes through the window the way it used to come through when Beverly was sitting across from me. And for a moment, before the moment passes, it's just ordinary life, the way it always was. She wanted that for me. She said so in the letter. She wanted me to have the ordinary mornings back, the coffee and the light and the sense that the day ahead was simply a day. Something worth getting up for. I'm trying. I owe her that much. I owe her considerably more than that. But trying is what I can do right now, and so I do it. Every morning I come back to the kitchen table and I sit down and I let the light come through the window. The garden is doing well this year. Better than last year. The marigolds came back thicker than I planted them, the way marigolds do if you give them decent soil and a little faith. Beverly would say that proves something. I think she's right. Thank you for listening. If someone you love is carrying something heavy right now, something they can't seem to put down or bring themselves to share, please reach out to them. Be patient with the silence. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones least willing to burden us, and sometimes the best thing we can do is simply make it clear that we're there, that we're not going anywhere, that whatever they're holding, we can help hold it too. Don't wait until the closet reveals what the conversation never could. The light in Beverly's study is steady now. Always has been, actually. I just couldn't face turning it on for a long time. I turn it on every morning now.